If someone follow the Dharma traditions, they must study this language, whether they are Vietnamese, Chinese, or whoever. So this is a common language, okay, like Latin language for monks and nuns, and even the novice to study. Of course, some young people, they may not know, but they understand the meaning a little bit in general. Yesterday, we have a young girl, she's 16-year-old, who came here from Thailand by what you call foreign exchange programs. And she lived with a professor at Ivy Tech, and that professor brought her to our monastery to visit us. I asked her to do the prayer in Thai language, but actually in Pali. Yeah, she doesn't know, she's still young. But that's a common language that they use in recitation. Right? And yeah, this is really common. But this one is different. Remember I told you that because of Muslim invasion, when they came to northern part of India, they destroyed everything, including one of the most oldest Nalanda, oldest and largest Buddhist university. It's built in the 5th century. And according to some historians, they say that they burned the sacred collection for 6 months. Wow. That's really, this is the red flaws of the Buddhist tradition. But fortunately, right before that, this kind of sacred collection has been translated into Chinese and Tibetan language already. So right now, especially I know some Tibetan monks, they retranslate the Buddhist Sutra into Sanskrit again. Because the Tibetan language is pretty close to Sanskrit. Later on, we explain one of the Tibetan Prime Minister, he went to India to study Sanskrit, and after that he went back to Tibet to read Tibetan alphabet, Tibetan language. The reason why it's pretty close. And it took me 6 months to study Tibetan language in India in 1998, 1999. But when it got to the States, I almost forgot all. And up to now, I could not remember. It's pretty hard. It's pretty hard. It's a lot of grammatical, what do you call it, functioning. Yes.
There's a place in Louisville that teaches the Tibetan language at the monastery or whatever that is called. If you want to learn Buddhism, they teach it in Tibet.
Yeah, unless you have the education, otherwise it's not easy. Yeah.
So that means that when they translated that language from, was it how you said Sanskrit? Sanskrit. When they translated Sanskrit to Chinese and to Tibetan, then they saved some of that material. This material is coming from Buddha, some of it, like 5th century.
Almost. Yeah.
So they saved it then.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay, let me put it this way for you to understand clearly. So for the first Buddhist council, second Buddhist council, that's with no written language yet. It's just oral
Tradition.
Oral reputation.
Okay.
You understand that? The first and second. But then to the third Buddhist council, during the Ashoka times, he convened the third Buddhist council, and according to some scholars, but it's still debatable. That's they have started to write the Buddha teachings into this form, Sanskrit, Prakrit, even Pali. You understand that? But it's still debatable. They have not found any evidence yet. But the only thing they found, the only evidence they found is the Pali one in Sri Lanka, where they first wrote down the Buddha teaching in Pali in Sri Lanka during the 1st and 2nd century BC. Make sense? You got that? Okay. Yeah. All right. So okay. So let us finish. Let's move forward then. I hope it's not complicated for you, huh? Number 4, Nick. Is that right? Please, what do you have for him?
Well, Buddhagasa was a 5th century Sri Lankan Theravedic monk.
Yes.
The importance of Buddhagasa came through his commentaries. He's known for writing over 10 commentaries.
Yeah.
His most famous was the Visuddhimagga, which is English for Path of Purification. And it's a comprehensive guide to Theravedic practice.
Yeah.
It's predominantly through the teachings of Buddha, through his theoretical and practical understandings, and he's still considered a big part of studying Buddhism today.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, he is a 5th century Indian Theravedic Buddhist. According to his biography, he was born in southern India, and later he moved to study Buddhism in Sri Lanka. And he wrote this famous book, A Path of Purifications. And plus, he made a lot of commentaries of many different sutras, Buddha teachings. But this book is pretty important. If you want to understand about the Buddhist meditative trends, his book explains in detail. Of course, you have to learn some Buddhist terminology to recognize us. It's not easy to absorb. But if you understand, it's very deep. It's in depth. That book, The Path of Purification, is I've read this is thick. This has been translated into English. This thick book. Okay, so this is a famous one, and this book or his commentaries now is like the standard for the Theravadins monks or people or scholars to follow. That's when he set a standard to understand what Buddha teaching, especially in meditation too. Make sense? Mm-hmm. And of course, in Mahayana version, there's plenty of commentaries, plenty of scholars to write all kind of philosophy of principle. We discussed about that. Yeah.
Where would that book fit into the canon?
Oh, it's commentaries.
Commentaries,
Mm-hmm.
okay.
Anyone can make comment.
Okay.
You do too. You can you can do the commentary too. Okay. So this is common. Okay, let's move on here. Okay, number 5. Yeah, you have this. What do you have there?
Okay. So our book said that it's likely the Buddha spoke Magadhi, a dialect that's related to Sanskrit. But he was also born into a royal family, and he would have learned how to read and write Sanskrit. And since Sanskrit contains the fundamental terms like karma and nirvana, it's often considered the authoritative language of Buddhism today. As we've already covered this, but after Buddha's death, meetings were held, and the monks recited what they knew to gather all the teachings in one place, and it was also part of their worship, was to recite each teaching like precisely and to commit it to memory, and then to teach it to others. This began in 5 CE and continued all the way into present times. And starting in 1 CE is when they started writing it down. They found bark inscriptions and leaves where they inscribed the teachings that date back to 1 CE, and some of the languages included Gandhari, Sanskrit, and Pali. And Sanskrit and Pali are very closely related, like you already mentioned. And those, that's when they started writing down everything that they had recited, and that eventually became the Pali Canon. Even though the teachings of Buddha have been written down and transcribed into many languages, the practice of memorizing it and reciting them exactly never stopped. And several linguistic experts, and there's like 5 or 10, I mean, there was a big long list of linguistic experts who have studied all these ancient languages, as well as Chinese and Tibetan, and have traced the words down. They have not been able to find very much like failure as far as translation. They're saying the parts where Buddha said this, they're so consistent that they can't debate that he didn't say it. So whereas a lot of times things get lost in translation, they said if the parts where they're saying that Buddha said it, it's recited so precisely orally, that they wrote it down precisely, so that's a really good preservation of the original information. That's pretty much all I have.
Most of the time, especially when you encounter later on to study some higher Buddhist books, you start with the sense of first I have heard. That's the first sentence. That's Ananda spoke or recite orally. This is like when he decided. Remember in the first Buddhist council, his used this quote. First I have heard from the Buddha, not from himself. He didn't speak that type of teaching, but first I have heard from the Buddha. So especially that's in this sacred traditions, sacred canon, sacred collections. Again, the Buddha teachings. Let me show you this again. I start to, especially during the Ashoka times, right? It spread to the east and the west. Here, right? When it spread to the east and the west, the Central Asia, China, and so forth. So, according to many scholars, they say that Buddhism spread to China, even Vietnam, or the other area in the east. And monks start to translate in the early times, either the first or the second century CE. And the reason why somehow it is later on the Sanskrit could be resolved in Chinese languages, Italian language or Tibetan languages. Right? Okay? So you got that?
Say it again.
I mean that Buddhism, remember during Ashoka times, he sent many missionaries to different countries, far east and far west, right? So, and each missionary group carries some Buddhist books or some Buddhist teachings in the form of books or in the form of religions, whichever. And they start to translate probably first or the second century CE in China, in Vietnam, or other places. Translate into the local dialect, translate into the local language, the Chinese, Chinese and Vietnamese, and so especially Chinese one. Okay? Yeah. That's the reason now, like I told you, now since the Sanskrit collection has been lost, almost lost, so they retranslated from Tibetan language into Sanskrit. Alright, so let's move on. Okay, number 6. Yes, what do you have?
Okay. Kumara Hive? I can't
Yeah,
say it.
Kumarajiva.
Yeah, okay. He was a Buddhist monk,
That's
scholar, and translator who translated the Buddhist language of Sanskrit to Chinese, and therefore helped spread the Buddhist religion to China. He was actually born into a noble family of monks, and it was said that.
Kucha.
Okay.
Yeah, not Chinese. Yeah, Kucha. Kucha is small kingdom in the far west of China, but now it's belonging to one part of China now. Yeah.
Okay, but it was said that when he was as young as 7, he began learning different languages, and 2 years after that, when he was 9, he went to school to start learning more languages, and then left at the age of 12 to explore his religious faith. He then ended up in a monastery, I believe in China. Was it China? And then, yeah, basically he just went from there, learning religion, and later on in his life translated the Buddhist teachings from Sanskrit to Chinese.
His life is very interesting. This one here. I wrote my master thesis on him. Yeah, his life is very interesting. His father was a Brahmin priest, So he wandered here and there. So he ended up at Rajiva grandfathers. And so his grandfather, who was a king, invited his father, the wandering priest, Hindu priest, not Buddhist priest, to become a spiritual advisor. You know what means spiritual advisor? We have that title here? No? Like chaplain, right? We have it in the chaplains, right? Okay. So, yes, he accepted that course, and later on he got married with the princess. That means his mother. And when Kumarajiva was about 7 years old, his mother wanted to become a nun. And of course, she needs to have permission from his father, but his father rejected because he attached to her. Yeah, but what happened? That his mother so dedicated, so determined with the demand to become a nun, Buddhist nun. So she fasts for 7 days. And of course his father gave up and allow his mother and him go to the monastery to study. So his mother later became a nun, and she took him along when he was 7. And he's so brilliant, he's so smart to learn many different languages, plus many different teaching from many different great masters in those times, including the Mahayana and Theravada monks. And eventually he's so famous that a Chinese emperor sent the army to occupy this country. Not to occupy the country, but to capture him. Because he's so precious, he's so famous in those times. Yeah.
Who taught him? His mother taught him.
What is that?
Kumajara.
Yeah.
His mother taught him. But he was 7 years old, right?
Yeah.
And they went to
the monastery.
So so he got taught in the monastery.
In several monasteries with different Buddhist monks and red Buddhist monks, or red Buddhist scholars. So that's the reason he's so famous that the Chinese emperor, he sent the army to this country, not to occupy this country, but to capture him. So that he would bring him back to China to do the translation work. Yeah. But of course, somehow he failed. That emperor failed because of the internal conflict and internal fighting with that emperor, and the general kept him there for, let's say that, for 20 years. But fortunately, during those times, he studied Chinese well. Later on, he so fluent in Chinese. The reason he could translate the Buddhist teaching from Sanskrit into Chinese beautifully and smoothly. Even me too, when I recite the Buddhist teaching that's translated from Chinese to Vietnamese, it's smooth, it's really nice, because he know Sanskrit as well as Chinese well. How many of you know several languages here? What do you? French or German, French? Wow. Can you speak?
Which one?
What?
Natürlich.
Oh, really? Okay. That's good. How are you?
Japanese.
Japanese? Wow, okay. So you learn some Chinese too? Or still related?
No, not really any Chinese.
Oh, really? Okay. Actually, Japanese language spring from Chinese.
Yeah, a lot of it has the same symbols.
That's different from the speaking language, but the written language. How about others? How about others? You know second language?
Not yet.
Not yet. Spanish?
Spanish, but I haven't used it in a couple of years, so it's very rusty.
Okay, that's good. How about others? You know Do they? Yeah.
I took German in high school, but I don't know very much of it.
In some of your major, they require you to have second language, right? Especially in liberal major, is that right?
Yeah.
It's your choice, or is it even your choice, or you have no choice?
No choice.
No choice.
No choice.
Okay. Which one? Which one the major one? French or German or what?
I don't know, German, Spanish. You know, have to have like I gotta have like 2 different foreign languages. So I gotta get busy.
Yeah, in order to be scholar in most of the major, right? You have to know at least 2, right? Okay, so let's move on again. So he's one of the greatest translator in China. Okay, number 7, please.
Yeah, I am.
Yeah,
Oh, you can go first.
I don't really have very much. I know that the Tibetan canon is divided into 2 divisions. The first is Kanjur, which is the word of Buddha, and then the second is Tanjur, which is all the commentaries and other literature, and that they were inscribed on wooden blocks.
Yeah. And what else? How could the Tibetan canon develop in Tibet? How?
I don't have that.
Don't know. You have anything?
Yeah, that's pretty much what I got. They that language, what we was talking about,
Sanskrit.
Sanskrit.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, well, Tibetans, they translated that language from that to Tibet, and they had a difficult time because there were so many different documents, texts, and everything. There were they had things. There were materials that were non-Buddhist, like they had astrology, philosophy. They had a lot. Yeah.
This is the oldest.
Yes. So they had to sort all that out and get the basic teachings of the Buddha, which she was talking about, and that was the
Kanju.
Kanchu. That was the teachings of the Buddha, and then the Tanjar was more like commentaries. And so, what else did I get here? Okay, they was having a tough time because when they first started early on, there was a lot of, like what you talked about, a lot of fighting going on, so they had to stop some of the translations. And but when it was resumed, it was some of the, it's what they call they considered the Tibetan's canon to be the more the authoritative canons of the 3. Not really.
That's in the reviews.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. That's all.
Yeah. So that's basically it.
So again, up to now, next week we learn more. Right? Next week you please do more research about Chinese Canyon and Tibetan Canyon. You will see more. But most of the materials in these 2 main canyons that's been translated from the Sanskrit canyons is similar. There's some variation, but most of them are similar. But the Tibetan canyons is emphasized more on the tantric. On the tantric path. Yeah, we will discuss about that in what we call Theravada, Mahaya, and Vajrayana. We will talk about that later. Yeah, yeah, and you know the Mongolian emperor during the 11th or 12th century. They occupied the whole part of China as well as some part in Eastern Europe. You know what I'm talking about?
Was this doing Genghis Khan?
Yeah. And they support Tibetan Buddhism and doing those stuff. Yeah. And the Yuan, this is Mongolian emperor. They support the Tibetan translation there. And later on we have this many different printing of Tibetan canyons. Let me, yeah.
They said they stored a lot of information in the monasteries and places like that. You know, the texts, canons and stuff.
Yeah, let me tell us a story. It's super interesting. Probably you may not. It's unbelievable. Here's some story. This is particular sutra. This is a famous story. Sugar Gamma Sutra. This is one of the Mahaya Sutra, the Mahaya teachings, and it was considered as a national treasury in India. If whoever took it out from the country, they would be executed because it's national treasury. Like you go to museum, you steal some
One of the
artifacts, right? You commit crimes. So during those times, during the past in India, so this particular sutra is considered as national treasury. And what happened? One monk, he has determination to bring this sutra to China, so that he could translate and pass to the people over there. And how did he do?
He memorized it. He memorized it.
Some of them, many of them memorized it, but it's still long. And what do you do? Because later on we talk about how the religions was written down in silk, in cloth, in book and so forth. So this sutra has been written down in the silk cloth, and he wrote it over as a small one. And what happened? He cut his tie and put inside that.
He did what?
He cut his leg.
He cut his tie.
And he rolled it up and he put it in his leg.
And carried through.
He wanted that bad.
How did he keep it from getting ruined?
That's the point. And when he got to China, he met the prime minister and other, Chinese chemists who use some kind of special chemical to cleanse the blood.
And leave the ink.
Yes. That's really a famous story in Buddhist tradition. And a lot, in every tradition, there's still some people who so dedicate to the tradition, right? They sacrifice their life for the tradition. Make sense?
Martyrs.
Huh?
They're martyrs.
Yeah. This is in all traditions. So if they really dedicate their life for their faith, so they may not care much about the body alive. Right. Okay, so that's one of the story. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Okay, number 8, please. Amy? Yes?
I got that the Polytext Society in 1994, they started a fragile palm leaves project, which preserved the manuscripts that were written like way back. They were like the original manuscripts were written on birch wood or bark and palm leaves. They were they were preserved, and then they were bound together, and a lot of them were destroyed or because of the weather, or they were taken apart and sold as artwork. So they started this movement in '94 to try to preserve these things. The birch wood was put in clay jars, and they're at the British Library right now. I think it's called the British Library.
Yeah.
Yes, the British Library. And they were the birch ones were the original. They were back in, I didn't put the date in my paper. It was a CE, like the 1st century. But they were in the form of scrolls, so those were even more delicate than the palm leaf manuscripts.
This is here. Okay, this is here, right?
Yeah, and some of them were burned.
Okay.
But they've been in use since before the 5th century. And 5th century CE, and existing examples date from the 18th century and later. It was before they, before paper was invented or the printing press. Yeah.
And she lived with a professor at Ivy Tech, and that professor brought her to our monastery to visit us. So I asked her to do the prayer in Thai language, but actually in Pali. Yeah, she doesn't know, she's still young. But that's a common language that they use in recitation. Right? And yeah, this is really common. But this one is different. Remember I told you that because of Muslim invasion, Kaaba sacred collection has been translated into Chinese and Tibetan language already. So right now, especially I know some Tibetan monks, they retranslate the Buddhist Sutra into Sanskrit again. Because the Tibetan language is pretty close to Sanskrit. Later on, we explain one of the Tibetan Prime Minister, he went to India to study Sanskrit, and after that he went back to Tibet to read Tibetan alphabet, the Tibetan language. The reason why it's pretty close. And it took me 6 months to study Tibetan language in India in 1998, 1999. But when it got to the States, I almost forgot all. And up to now, I could not remember. It's pretty hard. It's pretty hard. It's a lot of practical, what do you call it?
There's a place in Louisville
Yes.
that teaches it. There's a place in Louisville that teaches the Tibetan language at the
If someone follows the Theravada traditions, they must study this language, whether they are Vietnamese, Chinese, or whoever. So this is a common language, like Latin language for monks and nuns, and even the novice to study. Of course, some young people, they may not know, but they understand the meaning a little bit in general. Yesterday, we have a young girl, she's 16 years old, who came here from Thailand by what you call foreign exchange programs. When they came to northern part of India, they destroyed everything, including one of the most oldest Nalanda, oldest and largest Buddhist university. It's built in the 5th century. And according to some historians, they say that they burned the sacred collection for 6 months.
Wow.
This is the red flaws of the Buddhist tradition. But fortunately, right before that, this